On now.
All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming tonight. My name is Sharon Dukett, and I am going to be talking tonight about what to include in your memoir and what to leave out. And can everybody see the screen with where it says what to include in your memoir and what to leave out?
Yep, you are on. That
Okay,
works.
good. Okay. All right. So my name is Sharon Dukett. That's my website right there. And has other contact information in there. I'll come back to that again later. So if you think of things later. Okay, so writing a memoir. You may ask yourself, where do I begin? Many of you have probably written memoirs already, or you have a draft of a memoir, or you're thinking about writing a memoir. Maybe you're halfway through. In any case, with any book, as anyone who's ever tried to write a book knows, that knowing where to begin is always a little bit complicated. And for myself, I know that I had written almost my entire first draft before I wrote the chapter that actually opens the book now. I had completed chapter 1 4 different times and changed completely different versions. It wasn't just like a modification or an editing or a rewrite. It was like a totally different scene. Because right along at the beginning, what I found is I came up with all these clever ways to start the book, but none of them really seemed right. This quote by Graham Greene, I thought, kind of says a lot. And there's always one moment in childhood when the door opens and lets the future in. And depending on what part of your life you're writing about, childhood might not be involved. You might be writing about a period of time in your life in adulthood. But there's still that one moment when the door opens and lets the future in. And that's the moment where everything changes and the period of time that you're going to be writing about happens. Frequently, childhood is when that happens in memoir, but not always. So finding what that one moment is really kind of a magical point to open in. You don't have to open there, but it gives you an idea of what might be the right moment in time to open. I myself wrote a book about when I ran away from home when I was 16 years old and what happened to me over the next few years. And what I realized as I had gotten to the end of the book is I had never written the scene where I ran away from home, which kind of is where the whole story began. So that was what I was missing. And that was the moment in my childhood at 16 when the future all changed. Something to keep in mind about writing memoir is that memoir is not an act of history, but an act of memory, which is innately corrupt. And that was said by Mary Karr, who wrote a wonderful book called The Art of Memoir. Many of you may have read that book, or Liars Club, which is another book that she wrote. That was actually one of the early memoir books that kind of started the memoir trend in the 90s. Art of Memoir is a wonderful book that gives a lot of background on writing memoirs and how-tos kind of thing. So the one thing to remember about writing memoir is you aren't trying to write historical facts. And so you shouldn't let yourself get bogged down in trying to be absolutely accurate, because you're writing from your memory and everybody's memory is going to be different. Whether you write from your memory, if two of you talk tomorrow about this talk that you attended tonight, you're both going to have different memories of it. And you'll probably, some of you will have missed one part. You might have remembered something else. You might even disagree on what I said about something. And that's memory, because the moment it happens, it becomes memory, and it's no longer 100% accurate. As a result of that, memoir, which we're often writing about times that are even further back in the past, is not reliable for history. And you shouldn't worry about if what you remember about an event doesn't match up with what somebody else remembers about an event, you really just need to write what is your true memory of that event. Isabel Allende, who wrote a memoir called Paula, among many other books, says, a memoir is my version of events. It's my perspective. I choose what to tell and what to omit. I choose the adjectives to describe a situation. In that sense, I'm creating a form of fiction. And that really sums up a lot about what memoir is. You don't have to tell everything that happened in your life. And in fact, you shouldn't tell everything what happened in your life. You get to decide. And you get to decide how much you want to include and how little you want to include, and even who you want to include or not. And most of you are probably clear on this, but just to explain for anyone who might be a little bit confused, if you are writing the entire story of your life, you're writing an autobiography. If it's just meant to be an factual events of your life. So memoir is about a slice of your life where you tell a particular story that is going to have, is going to convey something that you want to tell the reader. How long should your memoir be? This was recently updated, so this should be very recently updated. So this should be pretty accurate. An ideal length of a memoir is between 80 and 90,000 words. And it's recommended that you stay within 70 to 100,000 max. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't outliers. And in fact, Tara Westover's book, Educated, that many of you might have read, is well over 100,000. And she's been on the top 20 Amazon best-selling list for 153 weeks. So obviously, and that was her first book. So it happens, you know, that's not to say that you can't go be outside of these ideals, but this is what typically is expected of the size of a book. Now, when I wrote my memoir, when I wrote my first draft, I didn't actually know how many words I had written. I knew how many pages I had, and I didn't know what that translated into because I wrote my draft over many years. I actually started writing it, the bulk of it I wrote in the 90s. I put it aside for a long time and then I came back to it. So when I went to look and see how long it was, I took all these chapters I had written, I added them all up together, and it turned out I had written 170,000 words. Obviously too long. So my first thought was, wow, maybe I've written 2 books. I had the wonderful opportunity to meet Frank McCourt at a memoir conference in the year 2000. And I had the opportunity to ask him if Angela's Ashes and his second memoir, Tis, were actually one book originally. And he said, yes, he had written them as one book. And therefore, it was too long. He split it into 2 books and had 2 wonderful bestsellers. That didn't turn out to be my case. So I had to figure out what I was going to do to get my 170,000 word draft into the 80 to 90,000 range of words. And that's why I feel qualified to be here today to help you figure out how to do that if you are in that situation. Now, some of you may have the opposite problem where you've written 50,000 words and you don't even know, where to go from there and how to make it get to, closer to 70. And then others of you are just starting out writing a memoir and you're figuring, geez, what even belongs in this book. So one of the first things to do, if you're just starting out or if you're only a little ways into it and you haven't written the whole book, first thing you want to do is create a rough outline. And it doesn't have to be something that you're going to follow exactly, and it's probably going to change over time. But just to get a sense of what you think the scenes are or the parts of your life that you want to include. It doesn't necessarily have to be scenes right off the bat, but you want to talk about you really want to focus on the turning points during the period of time that you're writing about. So in my case, when I left home was a turning point, and when I ran away from home. And then there were other things that occurred that caused change to happen in my life, and those were turning points. I hitchhiked across Canada at one point. At another point, I went to live on a commune. So those were all turning points in major portions of the book. And you, in your life, have events or experiences that happened to you that changed you in some way. They don't have to be as dramatic as moving to a commune. They can be, a lot less dramatic, like, having someone in your family become ill, or finding out that your husband's cheating on you, or, maybe it's something like, discovering that your sister has lied to you. I mean, those could all be turning points. If your sister has always been somebody you loved and trusted and didn't expect that to have happen. Your other, besides the outline, if you've already written a large portion of a memoir like I had, where I had the 170,000 words, what I had to do was create an inventory. And that was basically going through each chapter and each scene and just writing a few words about what that chapter is about, so that I could look at it and see the book as a whole and how it progressed. Now, once you've done that, the next step is to look through all of those notes about what scenes you're going to include or what scenes you've already included. And you have to ask yourself, what is in it for the reader? Because this book that you're writing, unless you're famous, which probably most of you aren't, there has to be something, there has to be a reason that somebody would want to read it, because they aren't particularly interested. People aren't interested in knowing about Sharon Dukett's life. That, they don't know who I am. They have no interest in that. So there has to be something else about the book that makes them want to read it, besides that it's my life. And figuring out what that is very important in order to know what goes into each of your chapters and scenes. As a result, what you want to do is, as you go through each of these, you want to ask yourself, what do I want the reader to know from this? What is it that I am sharing with them that I would like for them to understand? Because ultimately, what you want to do with your memoir is you want to convey something that resonates with them, so that the reader is going to read it. They either want to learn from your experiences of another person, or they want to validate their own lives, or they at the very least, they want to have some sort of level of empathy with you, the writer. So it has to be some level that the reader can relate to. And that's what you're going to be looking for in each of those scenes. And if you don't have something like that, what I found with my book is I had some scenes that were really interesting, but they were just interesting. They were maybe, events that happened or whatever that, were interesting, but I couldn't really say that it drove the story forward. Because ultimately, what you need to identify for the book as a whole is, what is the message or the theme you want to share with this book? And for me, that took me a while to figure out. I was writing, like I said, for a number of years, and everybody kept saying, so what's your theme? And I'd say, I don't know, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. I didn't really know what my theme was, but I kept writing, I kept writing. And it wasn't until I went and I did my inventory that it became clear. Because as I was going through all of my chapters, I got to a particular one, and I wrote, in this chapter, this is where I awakened to feminism and the women's liberation movement. And I realized that everything that had happened to me up until that point was a result of repression that I was experiencing because of being a woman. And all of a sudden there it was. That was my theme. And I've been writing about it all the time, and I never even realized it. It's better if you can figure out your theme ahead of time, because then you wouldn't have to write 170,000 words. What I had to do is then go back and start eliminating words. If you already know what the ultimate message is or the theme, and for me, this book wasn't just about feminism as a whole. I mean, that's very broad, and well, you don't want your theme to be so broad that people feel like that they already know everything there is about that and they're not interested. It has to be broad enough that a number of people will relate to it and understand it, but it also has to be specific enough to you that they are interested in hearing what you have to say about it. So in my case, my theme was about awakening to the women's liberation movement that was happening in the early 1970s, which was a specific moment in time when the women's liberation movement was sort of exploding. And many of you who are older will remember that. And therefore, that's something that can be of interest to a large group of people. Whatever your theme is, you need to find the personal part of that you can tell and that your story will offer, that you have to share with your reader. So after I started getting rid of a lot of these sections of the book and then cutting out chapters and so forth and so on, and scenes and whatnot, to get down the number of words, I got near the end of, I think it was about 110,000 words, and it was still too long. And I had a really tough time at this point trying to figure out what else I could cut. So what I did was I asked a friend who was objective. She was objective because she wasn't a close friend. She was like the wife of a friend of my husband's, but I knew that she read a lot. She had an interest in the fact that I was writing a book. And I was really blessed because she was willing to read my entire manuscript and go through each chapter and decide what contributed to my theme and what didn't. And the way she did this is she created a chart of each chapter, and she rated each of them in terms of how much they contributed to the theme and how little they did. And at the end, she said, cut from the chapters where it contributes the least. So consequently, a 5-star theme, would be something that you're going to keep all of. But, 3 stars, well, there's probably something in there you can get rid of, something that doesn't quite contribute. Likewise, if you're trying to write a book that you haven't written yet, and you see that this particular chapter maybe doesn't contribute very much, you might want to add things that do contribute. If you still feel that that particular chapter is important, perhaps you just need to emphasize or add some more pieces that demonstrate what it is that you're trying to do. One of the things that can be difficult when you're writing memoir is cutting out characters, because your characters are not someone you invented. They're real people in your life that, they could be good, they could be bad, they had an impact on you. They might have been a very good friend. And so you have to ask the question of whether or not that person and their story in your book is important. They may be very minor. I did actually have people that I completely took out of scenes because not only did they not contribute to the scene, but they made it somehow more complicated. And so rather than, for example, I had a character that I talked a lot about him in this particular scene, and then he didn't appear in the entire rest of the book. And then there was plenty of other people in that scene, so I really didn't need him. So I just got rid of him. That can be hard to do if they're people you care about, but sometimes you have to do that because you have to remember that you're writing for this particular message and you're writing for to convey a particular situation. And like we said before, it's up to you, the writer, to decide what to omit and what to include. So even though they were there in reality, it's not necessary that you draw focus to that person. Because what you'll find is that when you focus on the people who do support your theme, it makes your book much stronger. And other characters who kind of are irrelevant just distract from the overall book. So when all is said and done, when you start cutting all of these things or enhancing them, when you're trimming them, you can take something that starts out as feeling as though it is not particularly coherent and turn it into something very beautiful and crafted and arty. So because what you are doing is when you're writing, you're creating art. And for that art to appear, you have to nip away at it and make it better. And a lot of the words that you write at the beginning, you're going to want to get rid of, or you're going to want to condense them and that sort of thing. So that's all part of what goes on during your editing process. And okay. And when you do that cutting, of course, you're going to cut from scenes that contribute the least, but also even in sentences. You want to make sure that the sentences are clear and coherent and that you haven't confused the reader. Sometimes that can be helpful to have beta readers or people in a writer's group that can give you feedback on that kind of thing. And then that other big question is, how do I know where to end? Now, that can be very difficult because if you're writing a memoir, you're still alive. And consequently, your life keeps going on. So it's very difficult to, in some cases, you might be able to say, okay, if you're writing about your divorce, maybe it ends the day you get divorced, or maybe it ends the day you meet your next husband or wife. But if you're writing about something that didn't necessarily wrap up nice and tidy at one specific moment in time, it can be hard to know where to end this book. So what I found is that essentially when you have wrapped up most of what you want to say and you feel as though you have shown the transition from where you started at the beginning of the book to where you are now in the book, which, in my case, this was a period of about 4 years. And in your case, it could be, 6 months, it could be 20 years, depending on what it is that you're writing about. But it's really about that transition, because you want, like any other book that you might read, a novel or whatever, there's always the transition of the character and the character arc and where the character ends up. So you in your book need to transition as well. And you need to show a spot in time and draw a line and say, okay, I have transitioned at this point. And then you might want to wrap things up. You might need an epilogue. A lot of times in a memoir, you do, particularly if you aren't ending it recently. I found, since I had written this so long ago, I had a lot of life, obviously, that happened after that. And so I had an epilogue where I sort of went over in a general way how the events of that time affected me over the long run of my life. And that's, so you can end it at the transition. And then if you want to give the reader more, you can do that to take them up to the current time in your life. So if you want to get more information about writing memoirs, there's a few good sources I would like to share here. One of them is the National Association of Memoir Writers, that you may be familiar with or not. They have monthly presentations, different kinds of courses, and a number of other sources for writers, including they have a great Facebook page where people can, Facebook group that you can join. and you can ask questions and you can share information with other people in the memoir path. A course I took that I loved is on the website Write Your Memoir in 6 months.com. I had actually already written my draft when I took it, but I took it because I wanted to figure out where to go from there. And a lot of what I learned in that class. They have a couple of different courses that they have available. The Write Your Own Memoir in 6 months course is very in-depth and involves you handing in work and getting feedback from one of the two mentors, as opposed to you can also get feedback from other writers, but it's really getting feedback from professionals that are working directly with you, where you meet every couple of weeks. I found that very, very helpful. It also gave me deadlines because you had a deadline every 2 weeks to turn in work. Another thing that they have that, but I should add that it is on the pricey side. So another one that they have that takes less of a commitment, but also has a lot of good information is the Memoir Boot Camp. I think they're starting one in April or late March. And that boot camp is has sessions where you don't interact with the instructor, but you do get a chance to hear a number of very good instructors that teach their coursework over each of the sessions. Another place is the Memoir Project, which is run by Marion Roach. On marionroach.com, she runs a number of classes, and she has her own particular process that she uses for writing memoir. So those are a few sources that you could use to further explore and get more help. So we're going to be going on to question and answers in a moment. And this is my book, No Rules, that I published last June through She Writes Press. And my website, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, most active on Facebook and Instagram. And if you need to email me for any questions and more information, anything you'd like to know, I'm happy to share my knowledge or help direct you to somebody that might be helpful. Sharon Dukett author at gmail.com. I'll just give you a minute if you want to write that down, or you can take a photo if you want with your phone. And I will stop the presentation.
This is being recorded so people can get your contact information also.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay. All right. So, questions.
Yes, we do have some here.
And I'm fine with, well, it depends on how you want to do it. I don't know if, I'm perfectly happy to, have questions go back and forth between us and have a discussion, unless you think it's out of hand.
We have a few questions here. One's from Patricia. Okay. Your images really support your points on share screen. How did you put those together?
Okay, I used Canva. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Canva, but Canva lets you, canva.com, I have the professional version. It's not terribly expensive. I think it's something like $12 a month. And it lets you create Facebook posts and Instagram posts, and it sizes everything correctly for you, and it lets you create presentations. It's a very powerful tool, and it has a lot built into it that lets you do that.
This one from, let's see, from Karen. Do you use language or slang of the time the memoir is set, and especially if the memoir extends over a few decades?
I use it in dialogue predominantly. I didn't really use it I don't think I used it so much in the narrative that I recall. I won't swear that I didn't, but that's, I think you need to use it in the dialogue because that makes it realistic of the time that you were in. And the way people talk, you get a lot from dialogue in terms of what people are like and what their character is like and of the times.
Okay, so one from Rich. did you write all from memory, or did you write in a diary over the years of your life?
I did write it all from memory, but I should point out that some of it I started writing as early as 1980. So I wrote about a period mainly from 1971 to 1974, with a little bit of my childhood in the 60s. And I should add that in my youth, I had an incredible memory. It's not so much anymore. So if I had to sit down and write this today, it would be a lot more difficult. But fortunately, I wrote so much of it back then, a little bit in the 80s and a lot more into the 90s. And one of the things that I found really helped me was when I was trying to dig into memory was to play music that I listened to at the time. I found that by listening to that music, I really got drawn into what the, it would take me right back there and put me right in the middle of where I was, and I could experience, it was like experiencing it all over again. I even actually put together, if anybody is interested, I put together a playlist on Spotify to go along with the book. Because I do mention music throughout the book, so certain songs that were playing and so forth, and then other ones, because especially from that era, music was very important. And then on my website, if you sign up on my website, you can get a detailed description of what the songs are from and so forth. So.
Okay, we have two questions from Gabby. Can you talk about being published with She Writes Press?
I can, however, that could get really lengthy. And I should also add that I am going to be speaking for the statewide chapter in April, on April 17th, and I'm going to be talking about hybrid publishing. So I could certainly talk a lot more about it then. But just as a little bit right now, my experience with She Writes Press was very positive. I'm very enthusiastic about the company. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, She Writes Press is a hybrid publisher, and it's an imprint for women's voices. And they do have a second imprint called Spark Press that publishes genre fiction and also and men's voices as well. So, but She Writes Press focuses predominantly on literary fiction and memoir. So it has been a very positive experience to me, and I can only say good things about them. So
they have a good reputation. It's really a good organization.
Yeah.
There's a second question from Gabby. Did you get your memoir edited before you submitted it? And if so, how much editing did they do?
Through She Writes Press? Well, okay. Yeah. So you have options. They do, the only edit they do as part of their package is a proofread. And they do a thorough proofread on it. You have to pay additional if you want a developmental editor or a copy editor. I paid for a copy editor. One of the things I should say regarding a developmental editor is that one of the reasons I didn't need one is that I had gone through a year-long, write your book in 6 months. I did that course twice. And Brooke Warner, who's the publisher of She Writes Press, was one of the instructors in that course. And I worked directly with her. So I was getting feedback from her all the time throughout. So she sort of functioned as my developmental editor. But also I really didn't have a lot of changes because the other thing I had done is I had spent many years, probably 6 or 7 years in the 90s in a writer's group where we met weekly or every other week. I can't recall now. It's either weekly or every other week. And we went through in detail all of each other's work. So that was really useful as well.
Okay, from Elizabeth, did you do family research to make your points?
Family research being, well, I talked to my sister about some of the events. I did talk to some of the other people in my book who are characters in my book about the times, different things that they remembered. And so I did get some information from other people as well to help me remember things. Particularly, when I was writing about a place, like for example, there's a chapter about that takes place in Chicago. And I was able to get a lot more information from the person who lived in Chicago most of his life, telling me about certain places, when we went for this ride, where was that? Where did this happen? And things like that. And he was able to give me that kind of information. So I did do that kind of research. And I also researched, for example, events that happened. With the internet now, I was able to look them up and verify, when they happened and make sure that I was remembering, bands that played and dates that happened and that sort of thing to make sure I had that accurate. And there was a few cases where I found I was off a little bit and I had to change them, but.
Let's get your picture back here. Just okay, Roberta, if you could put your turn off your video, please. From Connie also, the She Writes Press only publish female writers?
They do, but they do have Spark Press as another imprint which publishes male writers.
Okay. From Stephen, if you had to do it all over again, what would you have done differently with regard to the book? That's a tough question.
It is a tough question. What would I have done differently? Well, it was interesting because over the last year, there's a few scenes that I took out that I wish I had left in because of certain events that occurred that I removed, as I just spent a lot of time talking about how if they don't contribute to your theme, take them out. One of those events was going to a concert over on Easter Sunday in Los Angeles and watching right in front of me the police start a riot, which I don't know that I would have necessarily believed if I wasn't there, but I saw it happen. And so that became very timely this year with a lot of the things that were going on. So in that respect, I thought that perhaps it might have been useful to have that in there now, but ultimately that did not contribute to my discovering, awakening to feminism. So it didn't belong in the book. But it was interesting. And I may still use those pieces. And one of the things I did forget to mention is I didn't throw out anything that I removed from the book. I spent a lot of time talking about how much I took out, but it's all archived. I have all of that writing still. And so the potential is there to potentially use it either in a different book or in articles or whatever that I might use it for.
Okay, Patricia asks, did you create a plan to actively market your book?
I did, but I had to learn a lot beyond my initial plan because I didn't know very much. One of the things I did was I hired a publicist that I probably spent too much money for. And even if you publish traditionally, most times nowadays you have to do your own publicity and your own marketing. So if you're a new author, unless you're a really well-known author, if you're a really well-known author, you're probably not listening to me right now. So so you can expect to have to do your own marketing. And I learned a lot. It was very helpful for me with She Writes Press because they have their own Facebook private group that only authors that are published through them are in, but you can ask a lot of questions of authors who have been there before you, and you get a lot of information that way. And I have mostly just learned from seeing what other people do, and getting recommendations from others, and what I found works well. And I also sort of, after my initial push at the beginning, I learned to look at marketing. Initially I kind of thought, it was really important to get these really big national news, public publicity and that kind of thing. And the biggest one I ever had was from salon.com, wrote a feature article about the book. And for 3 days, I sold a lot of books, and then that was the end of that. So even having these big kinds of publicity doesn't necessarily go into the long term. So you have to have an ongoing strategy to keep things moving. And so I've just watched what other authors have done, and what kinds of things I like to do. And I found that just, coming and talking with all of you one-on-one, that's, really a rewarding experience. Book clubs, I love book clubs where, we get together and just kind of talk back and forth. It's harder to do that in a group like this, but it's really a lot of fun when you can actually have an interactive discussion. So.
From Matilda, can you get into trouble using real names?
Presumably. I mean, I had the advantage in that I was writing about something that happened now 50 years ago. So some of those people aren't even alive anymore. Some of them, but a lot of them had very ordinary names: Joe and Bob and John and Peter, names that could be anyone. But I did ask, my sister's name is not her name. If you've read my book, she wanted her name changed, and I did that for her because she's a very private person. And then there was another person in the book named Ernie, which I thought was such a unique name that he might be, and particularly because I talk about the town where he was living at the time, which is Chagrin Falls. So Ernie in Chagrin Falls is pretty identifiable. And I asked him if he wanted his name changed, and he said no. So that's, I also, there's not, I don't think I really, I mean, the only people who probably got a really bad write-up from me are people who would not be easily identifiable. And I was honest. So, I guess it depends a lot on who you're writing about. If you're writing horrible things about your mother or your brother or your sister, that can be a little more difficult. But there again, if you refer to them as your mother or your brother or your sister, even if you change their name, people are going to know who they are. So it's just part of writing memoir.
Okay. From Elizabeth, you talked about speaking at a statewide chapter. What was the organization?
Oh, CAPA, Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association.
Okay. That's right. You were speaking to our April, right? Yeah.
Right. Yes. April 17th. Yeah. Sorry.
That's all right. Connie is actually from Alaska. Where is she speaking? Let's see. Where she is speaking, see events page on her website. Okay, she's just saying that. Did you have an events page on your website?
Yes, I do. I do have an events page. So some of the, like, for example, the April meeting hasn't been really publicized yet. And I don't have a Zoom link for it yet, but that will presumably be coming in the future. So, but yeah, I do have anywhere that I'm going to be is on my events page right now. Right, and I add as new ones come up.
That's really a good idea also to have that page on your website, right, all your upcoming speaking events, and so that's a nice job.
Yeah. And I also have links. I don't know if I'll have access to the link to this, but we can talk about that after. But I also put the events that I have spoken with at already. If I have links to that presentation, it's up there, so you can go in there and look at other places I've spoken.
Gabby asks, has anyone in your family read the book? Mine never reread anything I write. Reread anything I write.
Yeah. My sister read it, and I also, my husband read it. And throughout my writing the book, I had asked him a number of times if he wanted to read it. And he said, no, I don't want you to feel constrained by what, and not write what you want to write because you're afraid I'm going to read it. So when the book was all done and I had my ARCs, which is my advanced reader copy, I said, I think it's time you sit down and read this because you really need to know what's in here just in case somebody confronts you with this or says something, you just need to know. And so he did. He sat down. He's not really a big book reader anyway. He reads newspapers and magazines and that kind of thing, but not books typically. So he did sit down and read it, and he was fine with it.
That's good. Any other questions?
And actually, my uncle, my mother's brother, read it in England. So yeah.
How do you like it?
He liked it. He said he liked it a lot, which sort of surprised me. But anyway.
Okay. That's good. Any other questions? Feel free now to ask Sharon of anything about memoirs. And we're talking more about in April, our April Saturday morning meeting. Sharon will be talking about hybrid publishing.
I
Why
see.
she chose it.
I see Roberta's raising her hand.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. I have a different take on memoirs, and I call them family stories. I have been researching family stories of both sides of the family for 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of pages. I don't even know how many I have, but certainly way more than you have.
Yeah.
And the purpose was to kind of validate the stories for future generations of the family. But if I wanted to consolidate any of it, how do you go about figuring out what to consolidate into a reasonably length memoir? I understand about outlining and that kind of thing. I'm an editor by profession, and I've helped a lot of people in Capo with their books. It's much easier to criticize others and to tell them what to cut than it is to cut your own stuff.
Right, which is why I got help.
But I'm just wondering how I can take this pile that's probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 inches or more of double-spaced manuscript copy and figure out a theme or what to do with it other than just leave it behind.
Right. Well, one thing you might, well, first of all, if you're writing memoirs in first person, and it has to be something that you yourself have experienced. So if you're having these stories need to be told to you, or you need to see them, or something to that effect.
Right.
So from that perspective, I mean, that's one thing that you would do. Have you read Liars Club?
No.
Okay, by Mary Card. She has a lot of stories in there about her mother and her father that took place when she wasn't there. And one of the ways she does that is she has, her father is in this. She goes with her father to this, I think it's a bar, where I read a long time ago, so I forgot now, where he tells stories. And so you have the experience of her listening to him telling these stories, and they actually joke around with each other, and they call it the Liars Club, which is where the title of the book comes from.
That sounds good. Thank you.
So that might give you some ideas about how to do that. And I think the other thing you might want to do is like sort of look for what are the themes that run through all of these stories that might contribute to a greater theme.
Dysfunctionality.
Okay.
It's a
Yeah.
big, it's the first thing that comes to mind. There's a lot of that in even in this generation, but certainly past generations, stories have come down. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking that might be a good thing.
Yeah. So you might want to look for something specific about that, because like there's a lot of dysfunctional people. And
That's what
so,
I think people can relate to that
right.
pretty easily. Yeah, no, I understand.
Right.
I would have to either pick a character that's dysfunctional or a part of a family or something and just concentrate on that. Yeah, thank you. You've been helpful.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Nobody is in the chat room at this point. Nobody.
Okay.
No, it looks like you've answered all the questions. Nice job, Sharon.
Thank you.
Yeah. Joe, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Sharon, and I'm so pleased that you agreed to be my speaker, and I look forward to hearing you also in April at the main meeting, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, and I really enjoyed being here.
Great. I
Nice
guess
job.
we're going to close the meeting, and you're welcome back anytime to speak at Southwest Kappa.
Okay, thank you.
Joe, do you want to open the meeting up to any other members that want to talk?
Well, that's a very good idea. Is there anybody else that has